is an important meeting. We had to change the topic from the original topic of the that we wanted to have, which was on the council, the Great Holy Council, supposedly of the Orthodox Church, that was now been downgraded to the Council of Crete, if you want to call it that, and more will be coming out about it in the future.
Could you speak up a little?
Talk to us, Abuna.
I'm sorry.
Talk to us, not to yourself.
All right. Plus, we're used to having a microphone. So we had to change the title to, which the executive board did, to married priests, or celibacy in the Western Church and in the Eastern Church. Our speaker that we had was going to be a married Roman Catholic priest from the Anglican tradition that was brought in. However, he had a conflict at the last moment and it had to change and drop out of his commitment to us. And in turn, Monsignor Dennis said he will give a few comments on his perspective, because as the ecumenical officer for the Diocese of San Diego, he's met many of these, or some of them, I guess, married priests who have come into the Roman Catholic Church, and he'll give his perspective on how marriage would fit into the current status of the Roman diocese, Latin diocese. Would that be an accurate perception? And then Father James Bankston will talk about this from an Orthodox and Eastern Catholic perspective, because in the Eastern Church there's a tradition of having married clergy from the priesthood down, not our Episcopal, and in the parishes and so on. And then we will move on to the actual business meeting, the most important of which will be the election of the president and treasurer, which is up. And at that point, I will turn the meeting over to Father James Babcock, who will conduct the election, and then the new president will take over the meeting from that point. During our presentation, our current treasurer, and right now the nominated treasurer for the next 2 years, is Bob Greenwell, and he'll be passing around a little envelope for a contribution to the parish that is customary that we take. So, without further ado, Monsignor Dennis, would you start out by giving
I'd be happy
with respect? Thank you.
First of all, I don't have anything formally prepared because I just found out like Monday or Tuesday that our speaker who was lined up couldn't be here, so I was asked to do it. And I said, I don't have time to prepare a formal presentation. What I know about celibacy, I can probably say in about 3 minutes anyway, but we'll expand it out a little bit. I have to leave I also got the dates for the meetings all mixed up. And so I had a whole morning of appointments today that had to shift to this afternoon. So I'm leaving at noon. I can't stay for the meeting. Like I did for President of the United States, I will vote for whoever is elected. Okay? It came to vote for President, and I will be honest with you, I sat there and I looked at it and I said, in conscience, I can't vote for either one. So I just moved on and let whoever won. So it'll be the same for whoever's president. You have my unqualified support. Father George mentioned the priest that was coming. He's only been a Catholic priest since June. He was ordained by Bishop McElroy. But a couple of years ago, I have an associate. First time in 14 years I have an associate. And he's a wonderful man. He was ordained for here, but then he was in domestic mission in Michigan, and then he came back to San Diego. And he came back to San Diego after Pope Francis was elected. And we were talking one day, and he started criticizing the Pope, and I said, stop right there. I said, in this house, we do not criticize the Holy Father. Whether you like him or not, he's the Pope. And he says, well, I don't care for the way he does things. And I said, like what? He said, well, he does things without explaining them first. And I said, well, I'll be sure he calls you the next time he does something to explain to you what he's going to do. And he said, yeah, but no other pope has done things like this. And I said, you mean unlike Benedict XVI?
Oh, man.
And he said, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, Summorum Pontificium, which cut the legs off bishops for the Latin Mass, and we've done anywhere the old silent one. And then that left those of us who work in the ecumenical ministry absolutely at a loss for words when he issued this decree welcoming and accepting Anglican, not just individual Anglicans, but whole communities into the Catholic Church, but yet preserving their Anglican heritage, but being Catholics. Now, are they Roman Catholics or are they Anglican Catholics? Some said, well, it's akin to the Eastern rites of the Catholic Church. No, it's really not, because the East is the East and the West is the West. So we really didn't know how to explain it, and we haven't been able to explain it. And it was subsequently, it's great fodder for another talk. I know exactly how all this came to be, and you learn more than theology in Rome, let me tell you. Learn how to play the games, and this is basically how this came about. But when Pope Benedict XVI issued this decree, and I cannot remember the name of it now, to allow whole Anglican communities to come in to the Roman Catholic Church, the Episcopalians in this country and some Anglicans around the world were rather offended by it, because it looked like sheep stealing. Come on in, we've got the truth of it. You can keep everything you want, but still say the way you are. And with that, in the United States, there are now, in the United States and Canada, there are 43 congregations, each with their own, not each with their own bishop, that has their own bishop whose headquarters is in Houston, Texas. And so there can't be more than maybe 1,000 people in this entire binational diocese, Canada and the United States. The entire Episcopal Diocese of Fort Worth, the entire diocese left the Episcopal Church, and a good many of them joined the Catholic Church as a result. The Episcopal Diocese of Pittsburgh did the same, and then several congregations. There was one congregation here in San Diego that came over to the Catholic Church. This is when Bishop Flores was alive. He had just arrived. He welcomed that community into the Catholic Church, confirmed them, and ordained their priest as a priest in the Catholic Church. In the process for doing this, there was a lot of work involved. There were 5 priests with 5 congregations, five priests, and there were only 3 congregations, had applied to come into the Catholic Church, and it was my job to vet all of them. And it was about a 2-year process. And in this process, only the one priest was actually accepted. For other reasons, the others, and they're valid reasons, the others decided, no, we're not going to come to the Catholic Church, we're going to do this or that or something else. And so they went in other directions. But they were those who came into the Catholic Church, if they were already married clergy, married priests, could continue to be married priests in the Catholic Church. This is nothing new, because, as you'll hear from the Eastern rites of the Church, that's been for a long time, but even after World War II, provision was made, particularly in Germany. I don't know of anything in this country, but in Germany, Lutheran clergy who wanted to become Catholics, who were married with families, were allowed to come into the Catholic Church, be ordained, and serve as priests. Very, very few in number, but that provision was allowed. I meant to look up the date, but I forgot, but I think it was in the late 80s or early 90s, there was also something issued, I think it was 86, issued called the Pastoral Provision, where individual Episcopal priests could come into the Catholic Church who were married and have families and continue to live as married clergy. Now, we had only one in San Diego who did that. There was another priest who came in from the Episcopal Church to the Catholic Church who was never married, and he died about 10 years ago. Both of these men have died. But the provision is they could come in with their wives and families. But if their wives should die, and it's the same rule we have for our permanent deacons. Permanent deacons can be married and ordained, but if their wives die, then they must make a promise to live a celibate lifestyle. They cannot marry again. Celibacy has always been an issue in the Western Church. Of course, it started way in the East. The Desert Fathers, the monks, they were all celibate. But as early as the 5th and 6th centuries, there were arguments over should priests marry or should priests be celibate. And it was always that bishops would, in the Western Church, bishops would always have been celibate. But married men could serve as parish priests. And for the first 1,000 years of Christianity, this was very common, to have married clergy in parishes. And they had families. They had what was called a benefice, which was their parish. And that's how the priest supported his family through the parish. They're almost like mini lords. By the way, Monsignor means my lord, so you're welcome. I taught that to the kids. Some of them will now say my lord when they see it. I like that. But it got to the point where there were tremendous abuses taking place. Monks were always celibate in the monasteries, but there were tremendous abuses among the married clergy who were parish priests, because they were handing on, they were having their sons ordained priests, and they became more business managers of their parishes rather than spiritual directors of their parish. So they were handing on their parishes to their sons. And it was getting to be really married clergy in the Western Rite, the Western world, was coming to be a rather corrupt institution. So as a way to correct this, it was around the year 1000, the church came up with the rule that no, from this point, and it was to correct abuses taking place, that priests must be celibate. They must be celibate in order to provide complete and total ministry to their parish, to the church, and be of service to their people without being distracted by family titles, family responsibilities. And I think it was 1080 when that was really codified. It's part of canon law of the Catholic, the Roman Catholic Church. Now, does that mean that this is divine law and can it never be changed? No, it can be changed. This is a decision of the human aspect of the church. It's a discipline. It can be changed. Maybe someday it will be changed. I doubt very seriously if I will ever see it in my lifetime. But even for those of us who are already ordained, we could not get married, because before we were ordained deacons, we made a promise of perpetual celibacy. And that's set. It would be those coming in after to be ordained now. How that would be, who knows? It might be, I doubt if it will be. But in places like Latin America, the Latin American bishops, and it's interesting with this Pope too, Latin American Pope, Latin American bishop. In Latin America, there is agitation to have married clergy to provide for the far outlying parishes, because there aren't enough priests to serve the Catholic population of Latin America. There aren't enough priests in Africa, despite the fact we're importing African priests now to serve in parishes in the United States. But even there, and they're more committed to the notion of celibacy, I think, than anyone, to be able to extend the ministry of the church to outlying areas. Will it change? Who knows? It could. It might not. It probably will not. Certainly not in our lifetime. And then, of course, this brings in the whole notion, too, of ordination of women as priests, which we do not do in the Catholic Church. There is scriptural evidence, and there is strong historical evidence up through the early Middle Ages that women were ordained deacons in the Catholic Church. And Pope Francis has just started a commission to investigate this, again, give a deeper, fuller investigation of the ordination of women as deacons. But that's a whole other story. But practically speaking, for celibacy, those of us who are Catholic deacons, transitional deacons on the way to being ordained priests, and Catholic priests, are committed to celibacy. And it's for the ministry and the service of the church. There are those who, even after they are ordained, find it is too difficult a lifestyle, and they leave the ministry. Some of them just pack up and leave and get married. I think that's what most of them have done who wanted to get married. Some of them also will go through the proper steps to be asked formally to leave, and basically it's the Pope who grants that final dispensation to leave active ministry and marry and raise a family. They remain priests, but they're no longer allowed to function in their ministry as priests with the proper permissions. And the purpose for celibacy simply is to give service to the church. How much service can we give if, like myself, I've got it changes between, depending how the military moves, 3,200 families, and for a long time it was just one priest. How much service can we give to the people? Nobody seems to complain about that. But if there were more priests, more service could be rendered. Simply stated, that's how celibacy developed in the Western Church. We've seen it work in Protestant communities, but it's interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine years ago, who's a pastor in a Protestant church, and he said that 40% of the clergy in his denomination were divorced at least once, some twice. Honestly, I don't know how any wife could put up with the lifestyle that we did. Up early, out late, maybe they would prefer it, I don't know. But another practical aspect of celibacy, when people talk about priests marrying in the Catholic Church, I say, you're going to increase your weekly contribution from $2 to $10. It's the only way we'll be able to support a married priesthood unless the priests have to go out and work for a living as well as maintain the church. So I don't have anything else set to say, but I'll answer any questions. More questions now or after?
Well, I should have said to write down any questions you have, but in this case, I would like to ask you to expand on one thing. Do you know how it's working out for the priests that have been brought in that are currently married? How is it working out for them?
The priest that was supposed to be here today was just ordained in June. And interestingly, he was married. Is he married or not? See, this fellow I don't know because I didn't work with him because he was part of the congregation. But he was married and then ordained. How it's working out for them right now, I really don't know. The congregations are so small and so spread out and diverse all over. And it's so brand new, in the Catholic Church that I don't think any studies have been done on this yet. They're still trying to pull themselves together as, it's not called the diocese, it's called an ordinariate, which is, again, United States and Canada, just to get their feet on the ground. The priests whom I know who were married, their families are fine with it, they were fine with it. But again, this was years and years ago. How the new situation is working out, I don't know. The one congregation that we have in San Diego only has 20 people in it. And so it's, and they meet where are they meeting now? I think they're going to be meeting at the chapel at the high school, one of our high schools. So I don't know how it really is working.
I'm going to go to violate one of my own rules and I'm asking questions if I can. If you
You're on
had
the way out,
something,
who cares?
if you had something,
Executive order.
Executive privilege.
if the Roman, especially a parish like yours that's so large, if you had a group of assistant priests that served like the permanent deacons now, but they were married, they were able to have jobs that were like social service jobs. They were married, but they were able to also serve the parish,
Right.
And take the burden off you.
Right.
How do you have you ever thought of that? How something like that might work?
I'd spend more time in Hawaii. No, it would be a great benefit because I have a deacon and a half. One is partially retired, some are retired, the other's not even full-time, part-time. But just the work that my two deacons, permanent deacons, do is tremendous. I couldn't do what I do without them being there for the classes they teach, the ministry they give, the counseling they give, heading up the different ministries in the parish as well, and even our lay people. And not having enough priests really empowers the lay people to do things more. We take communion on Sunday. There's a whole group of ministry for communion to the sick. after the 9 o'clock Mass on Sunday, they take communion out. We have 120 people at home who can't come to church. They're homebound. And so the ministers of communion take communion to them. See, I could never do that. And now with my associate, he's been visiting all these people. I can't possibly get out to visit all these people. So yeah, we had priests, and in the Episcopal Church, I knew one. I can't remember his last name. First name was George. He worked for, not General Dynamics. It's the atomic place. It was General Dynamics, the atomic place or something. And on weekends, he served as a parish in the evenings and things like that as a parish priest, as the priest of the congregation. I could see it working very easily. I don't have a problem with it. And there's also a problem then if the Catholic Church were to end celibacy as mandatory, two things would happen. Well, first of all, somebody married would have to have another job, probably, in order to maintain the family. And it's a question that came up to me. If a man wished to be celibate and as a priest, what would people say about his sexual orientation? Would he be criticized for not being married? Would the ending celibacy force men into celibacy rather than allow those who want to remain celibate to do so? I don't know. These are questions that are brought up. So I've been ordained almost 40 years, and so it was never in my mind to be married because I went and got Catholic seminary. And it's a calling. It's just some find after a few years they're just not meant for that, and so they leave the ministry. But yeah, with married priests serving as our permanent deacons do, it would be a tremendous help to the church everywhere.
Thank you.
Father Paul, Pastor Paul.
So we've talked a lot about the practical benefits of celibacy for parish ministry. I was listening to Immaculate Heart Radio the other day in the car, as I so often do, and Mother Miriam said...
Whenever I listen to it, I almost drive off the road.
Well, I was pretty good in my lane until Mother Miriam said that celibacy is the objectively superior and more God-pleasing lifestyle than married life.
All I can say is Mother Miriam is nuts. She really is, and she has said things. That's why to be honest, Paul, I don't listen to Catholic radio. As I said, I almost drive off the freeway at some of the things they say. No, it's not an objective superior state by any means whatsoever. And that goes contrary to what the Pope just came out in Amoris Laetitia, plus the document of Vatican II on marriage and family life. So she's way off the mark.
If I could just make a comment on that. St. John Chrysostom has a whole treatise on marriage, and has a whole treatise on the white versus black monastics, that interior monasticism is for everyone. And what is the holiest vocation is what God has ordained for you. So what is holy for one person may be totally unholy for another person. So it's a very individualistic calling that we have. So even if you go back to the fathers of the church.
So Martin Luther stole that from St. John Chrysostom. Okay.
Yeah. You read about the deacon that they cannot remarry if their wife is
right.
Wife, and that applies to all the deacons, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. Everybody, all
right.
Pieces, but it just hit me. Yesterday, my wife went to attend one of the priest healer that he came from the Philippines, and they had like close to 1,000 people attending, listening to him, and he said that he was telling God not to call him, call his brother, and then I was thinking about this. When God calls somebody, it's not a calling; it's like ordering, it's like some sort of ordering. And when God orders somebody, I mean, that's enough, but by itself is a blessing. And he's not going to think about the sexual things and this and that, because even Jesus, he approached that subject in the Bible when he said that some people who like neutralize themselves, you recall that. So it's a blessing when God calls somebody for his service. That's a blessing by itself that will neutralize anything that stands in his way. And whether it's he's married or not, when he called Peter, I went to Capernaum to the gated community when Jesus was living with his neighbors Andrew and John and Peter and all. It's beautiful community, like close to 1,500 people. It's all fenced and everything, right on the Sea of Galilee's shore. And then he went around to his neighbors practically. He called them, follow me and follow me. And when he says follow me, they did not question him. They just dropped everything and followed. I even saw the ship, the boat that Peter left behind when he said follow me. He left behind. So they at the low tide, they lifted it up and they put it in a shoal. Anyway, so going back to the same subject, that when Jesus asked somebody to follow him, he doesn't ask him whether you were married or not. And then,
well, that's true. And in seminary in San Diego now, we don't accept anybody. We're getting better in the numbers that we accept. It used to be when I entered the seminary, it was out of high school, so most of us did. College, seminary, and then on to theology. Now, there are older men, at least 2 years in the workforce, or community college, or university, or military. And what you were saying, there was one young man came to me, was a parishioner, and came to me about a year ago. And I said, Danny, what's this all about? And he said, I'm tired of running. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, Father, you told me since you met me that I should be in the seminary. I got a degree in kinesiology. I'm a paramedic. I just broke up with my girlfriend for 4 years because I knew this just wasn't going to be right. I've just been selected for training for the San Diego Fire Department. But I'm tired of running.
Yeah.
I'm going to apply for the seminary. I said, you can't get away if God wants you. So,
Exactly.
again, whether it's celibate or not, whether it's celibate or married, as Father
Yes.
George says, each state of life has its blessing.
That's true.
Thank you, Monsignor.
Thank you.
Let's go back to our original, what we're supposed to be doing is writing down our questions. I apologize for interrupting and violating my.
Well, you can now, because you're no longer in charge. You're still in charge, so get away
We
with
haven't
what you
voted
can.
yet. It'll come
Executive
down.
orders.
Now, our nominated to be president will now give the Eastern Catholic, which is also more on the Orthodox viewpoint on the married clergy. Thank you, Father James. Thanks.
I'm coming from what we sometimes call a hybrid existence, because being Catholic, Eastern Catholic, we are kind of the bridge between the Orthodox and the Roman Catholic things. So, and because of that, we've suffered certain things over the years being the bridge between the two, because the bridge often gets walked over and stepped upon. So I'm going to present a general view of married clergy, and then specifically about the Eastern Catholic reality. And then at that point, because of some recent legislation which has liberalized the issue for us, then we can talk about a common existence with regards to the Eastern Catholic and Eastern Orthodox view of things. And just a reminder, we're not talking about priests getting married. We're talking about married men becoming priests. That's a very important thing that we have to remember and remind people, because I often have people come up and say, priests should not be able to get married. And the worst thing you can think of is a priest dating, you know, before getting married. It's not a very pleasant idea among the people to think that their priest is, rather than serving them, that he's pursuing something, dating somebody. So again, we're talking about married men who have discerned a call to the priesthood. And many years ago, when I was discerning that call myself, I was a moderator on an AOL, I forget what they're called. There were little groups on AOL chat. It was a specific themed chat, and I was the moderator for one on Eastern Christianity. And the whole issue of married clergy came up, and I had one woman say, for a married man to think that he had a call to the priesthood is from Satan. So there was a very strong bias against the whole idea. And so I told her, I said, go to the Catechism of the Catholic Church and read such and such a paragraph where it talks about married clergy is to be held in honor, especially in the Eastern churches. And she comes back to me in the chat and says, oh, never mind. So just letting them know what the real teaching of the church is was very powerful. Married clergy has been an immemorial practice in the church. We see evidence, or we see a witness of this in Scripture itself. When we look at 1 Corinthians 9, verse 5, where it's talking about a bishop or a leader of the church having one wife. Matthew 8, Peter's mother-in-law. So Peter himself was married. And then there's also the reference in 1 Titus about a priest, that are we not allowed to have a believing wife? So again, married clergy is from Scripture. And it was a common, as Father Dennis said, it was a common aspect of the undivided church for the first millennium, both East and West. And it was the most common existence of clergy, especially parochial clergy. There's an important aspect of parochial versus monastic, which we will talk about at this point. It's seen, especially in the Orthodox churches and the Eastern Catholic churches, that if a priest is married, he's serving a parish. If a priest is celibate, he's a monastic. And in the West, over the centuries, there became a confusion and conflation of those two separate vocations, the vocation of priesthood and the vocation of monasticism. And over the centuries, it turned out in the West that the idea that if one was a priest, he was a priest-monk. And so the conflation of monasticism and the priestly vocation became united. And so if you were a priest, you were automatically considered to be a monastic. Therefore, you were considered, or you had to be celibate. And so in the West, there was this confusion of two separate vocations, whereas in the East, those two separate vocations remained separate. And the idea that one could be a monastic and not be a priest, well, that's true in the West too. But we didn't have that confusion in the East. Now, to turn this to a little more specifically dealing with Eastern Catholics, especially in the United States, this was the common practice in the Eastern churches, both Eastern and Catholic, both Orthodox and Catholic, in that we had a married clergy. But with the influx of Eastern Europeans in the late 1800s, early 1900s, Eastern Catholic parishes were created, and they appealed to the old country for priests. Married priests were sent, for example, Alexis Toth. He was a widower, and his daughter had also passed away, but he was still considered a married priest. And there were many other priests as well in the Eastern churches, Eastern Catholic churches, that came over here to serve the fledgling Eastern Christian parishes. Alexis Toth, who at the time followed the practice of presenting himself to the local Catholic ordinary, met with Bishop John Ireland. And in that discussion, or in that meeting with Bishop Ireland, it became known to Bishop Ireland that Father Alexis was a married man. A widower, but still a married man. And the meeting turned into a shouting match. And Father Alexis was greatly offended, and Bishop Ireland basically encouraged his departure from his presence, to put it nicely. And this led Father Alexis to seek communion with the Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church at the time. And with him went, eventually, 163 parishes and over 100,000 faithful from the Catholic Church into the Orthodox Church. So we Eastern Catholics refer to Bishop John Ireland as the father of American Orthodoxy. So this was a great injustice towards the Eastern churches, because it was a triumphalist view of the Roman tradition, which had become celibate clergy, as Father Dennis described, and that was seen as superior to the Eastern Catholic practice. Alexis Toth, who lived from 1853 to 1909 and has since been canonized by the OCA, the Orthodox Church of America, in 1994, was the leader of this group of Catholics that then became Orthodox. And subsequent to Father Alexis's conversion to Orthodoxy, in 1929, Rome issued a decree called Cum Data Fuerit, which was a very long document which sought to describe the way in which Eastern Catholics had to form their parishes, how bishops would, how it's basically the canon law governing the Eastern churches in the Western Hemisphere. And there was one single line in there that caused a huge uproar, and it was that all priests serving in in the Western Hemisphere that came from the East had to be celibate, and any priest that was ordained for the Eastern churches had to be celibate. Well, that caused a further outflow of faithful Catholics to Orthodoxy because of the way in which it was imposed, celibacy was imposed on them, which was contrary to their whole tradition. And as I said, over 100,000 faithful, probably more. I mean, some even say up to 200,000 left. And that was the reality that Eastern Catholics found themselves in terms of living in under a imposed law that refused to recognize the tradition of married clergy for them. Now, the Eastern Catholic parishes or dioceses in the United States and Canada, in the beginning in the 70s and the 80s, began to get around the law through some very creative ways. And they, especially there was a bishop in Canada, his name was Isidore Boretsky, and he discovered a way, or worked out a way, in which he would receive a letter from Ukraine requesting a deacon, because they were short on deacons. So bishop would select a man and loan him to a bishop in Ukraine for a period of a year. And after a year, the bishop in Canada would then request, I need my deacon back. And the bishop in Ukraine would say, we were so short on priests that I ordained him a priest. Do you still want him back? And so the bishop in Canada would say, yes, I still need him. So he would come back ordained a priest and would then begin serving parishes in Canada. Creative way of getting around canon law, which is not unusual and not unheard of. And there is great precedence both in East and West for ways of getting around canon law. There was another document in 1904 called Ea Semper for the Eastern churches, which prohibited the chrismation of children at the time of baptism. Wow. I didn't know this. It was universally ignored, because I know of no instance in the Eastern churches where children were not chrismated at the time of baptism. So that's an example of canons or rules being completely ignored, and now there's no question that we maintain our proper tradition, which was guaranteed to us, by the way, at the Union of Brest, when the Eastern, especially the Ukrainian Church, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, at least part of it came back into communion with the Church of Rome. So we see ways in which the Eastern Catholic churches were still trying to maintain their tradition while facing a legislation from the Church of Rome in terms of our celibacy, or married clergy. It became a little less an issue in the 1990s when the latest Code of Canon Law was issued, and Canon 373 of the Canons of the Eastern Church says, clerical celibacy, chosen for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, is suited to the priesthood, and suited to the priesthood is to be greatly esteemed everywhere, as supported by the tradition of the whole church. Likewise, the hallowed practice of married clerics in the primitive church and in the tradition of the Eastern churches throughout the ages is to be held in honor. So we see a relaxing of the staunch opposition to married clergy in the latest Code of Canon Law. And one of the first lines, or the actual, in the document of promulgation of the code, it says, all previous legislation contrary to the canons is now abrogated and abolished. So there is a case to be made that as of 1990, the prohibition of married clergy throughout the world was abolished by the latest Code of Canon Law. However, there are some canonists who say that wasn't the case, and that cum dataforet was still in force. Well, as of 2014, Pope Francis completely removed all objections and all prohibitions against the ordination of married men to the clergy for the Eastern churches throughout the world. So that whole issue now is moot. So that means that the Eastern Catholic churches and the Eastern Orthodox churches share finally an unencumbered common practice of married clergy. However, before I go on for this, in the year 1999, that was about the time when the Eastern churches, such as the Ukrainian Catholic Church and the Ruthenian Catholic churches, were developing their own, what we call particular law, taking the general code of canons of the Eastern churches and tweaking a canon here or there to meet their specific needs of their specific churches. So we call that the particular law. The Ukrainian Catholic Church just basically took that canon and said, fine, we can ordain married men. And so I was ordained in 2008 without any issues. Our patriarch was questioned by my bishop about whether or not he should ordain me, and Patriarch Lubomir Huzar said, it's in our canons. What's stopping you? Just do it. However, the Ruthenian eparchies of the United States came up with their own particular law, and in that they made the mistake of calling attention to the fact that they are about to start ordaining married men. Well, a certain Catholic personality, radio and television personality named Mother Angelica, got word of this, I should say, and really raised a stink about these unfaithful Catholics who really are rebellious Catholics are going to start doing something that the church forbids. And so Rome withdrew their approval of the particular law of the Ruthenian Church, and then said, we are going to allow you to ordain married men only with the permission on a case-by-case basis of everyone that you want to ordain. So they basically withdrew the approval of the canons of the Ruthenian Church. The Ukrainian Church didn't have that problem because we didn't call attention to the fact that we're already doing it. As I said, as of 2014, all of that is now undone and no longer an issue for the Eastern Catholic churches throughout the world. Now, that's not to say that married clergy is an easy thing. Is it to be sought after? Well, there are pros and cons to the married clergy, the life of the cleric who's married. Speaking from personal experience, it is very stressful sometimes. I have to support a wife and family, not just myself. And our practice or our legislation in my eparchy is each priest is given a certain food allowance, auto allowance, a housing allowance. Now the food allowance is not subject to a difference between a married man and a celibate man. So I get the same food allowance that a celibate priest gets, which is not enough for a family. That's the biggest difference. Also, for a parish who pays insurance, and that insurance is different for a married man with family than a celibate man who has no family. So, in terms of the cost that is the cost of a married priest for a parish is much more when he is married.
Cost of living?
Pardon me?
Cost of living?
Well, primarily for the health insurance, which is very expensive for our eparchy, because we have only 43 parishes in my eparchy. There's a couple of hundred for the whole United States for the Ukrainian Catholic Church. And by the way, most of the priests in the Ukrainian Catholic eparchies in the United States are married. So this is an issue for most of our parishes. Very few of our priests are celibate. Now that raises an issue. Bishops for our churches is becoming more and more difficult to find bishops for our eparchies. We do have religious orders, the Basilians and the Redemptorists, and so most of our hierarchy will probably come from the Basilians or the Redemptorists, or those celibate clergy that have chosen to become priests without marrying. Where was I here? So pros and cons. So again, one of the difficulties of a married clergy is that because of the aspect of the additional responsibility and the need to support a family, often our parish priests have to get a job outside the parish. Now that's true in the Orthodox Church too. This isn't just an Eastern Catholic reality. The local Ukrainian Orthodox parish here has a married priest who has to work as a security guard. Now, a security guard is a late night job, which means that he is not available for services during the week because he's probably getting home at 2 o'clock in the morning. He's unavailable during the week for services such as funerals, weekday services during the Great Fast, because if he does that, he will probably lose his job. So that's one of the aspects. Now that's true across the Eastern Catholic and Eastern Orthodox reality of when priests are forced, because of the situation, to work outside the parish. I've been really attempting not to get a job outside the parish. So since I've been here, I've been only a parish priest, and that's allowed me to make sick calls in the middle of the night if I need be, do services during the week, funerals during the week. What it means to be a pastor, to be available to the people, and not to have to call and say, "I'm sorry, I'm at my job. I can't come and visit you in the hospital when you're dying." I've never had to make that decision. So that is one of the aspects of a married clergy that is problematic in terms of supporting one's family. There's also the added pressure on the family. We live in a fishbowl. My children act up in church. I hear about it. Other kids act up in church. I don't hear about it. My daughter wants to get an odd color in her hair, for example. Or, I know of other priests that have had to deal with aspects of raising a family in a fishbowl. This is a common aspect between the Orthodox and the Catholics, Eastern Catholics, as well as the Protestants also. There are whole blogs and books written on the PK, the priest's kid, or the pastor's kid, and all of that additional stress that's put on them. They find out all the warts and all of the ugliness that the priest has to deal with in terms of his pastorate of a parish. Sometimes it's impossible to protect the children from those certain aspects of a parish life that might turn them off to being a member of the parish. In my own family, it's been an issue now and then when they find out, when I get a phone call that's unpleasant, or I react, unfortunately, to something that's going on. We also are accused of, married clergy are accused of having a split dedication. Are you the pastor, or are you a father? Well, I like to say that my family is part of my parish, and they are due the same, at least the same care that I give to the rest of the parish, because they are parishioners as well. But my bishop at my ordination reminded me that your family comes first. And there are times when the family must come first, maybe at the expense of the parish, but it's not very often that that happens. So we see that as yet another aspect that is somewhat problematic in terms of married clergy. However, there are great benefits to married clergy. One of them is that I have a whole support system at home. My wife is one of the greatest support that I have in terms of spiritual support, being able to build me up when I'm torn down by parishioners or by situations. I don't want to make it sound like it's just parishioners, but there are situations, monetary situations and things like that. Having a wife at home is a great benefit to me. Having children that can greet me at the end of the day, and we can talk as a family about situations, is a great benefit. And I know of some celibate priests who have bemoaned the fact that oftentimes when they came home after a long, hard day, what greeted them was the television, or an empty house, or a bottle. And often with clergy, celibate clergy that are off in, the boondocks, you can think of many parishes that are so far away from another parish that there's no way that you can have any camaraderie or fellowship with other clergy. The bottle was often the way in which they consoled themselves. So alcoholism was very prevalent. Not to say that it doesn't exist in married families, but having a family at home has been a great benefit. It also provides the clergy, the priest and the deacon with certain insights into family life that allows their ministry to be very fruitful and allows their spiritual direction of married people to be not theoretical, but practical. Because a celibate, although a celibate has grown up in a family and understands some aspects of family life, a married man with children has a certain insight and a certain experience that allows him to minister a little more fruitfully to married people who are undergoing some of the same things that he has. Sitting up at night, 3 o'clock in the morning with a sick child who's throwing up all over the place. I don't think many celibate clergy have that experience. Or worrying about the 102 temperature and are we going to have to run to the hospital? Or where are we going to get the money to pay for the dental work that needs to be done, the braces? You know, there's a lot of things, or how do we deal with the conflict between husband and wife, or siblings, or children and mother, children and father. All of those things are very important in the life of a parishioner that a married priest can have a little more insight into. I remember in the seminary, there was a man that had discerned that he was going to remain celibate. And he was very, very vocal about his decision, and he was very condescending towards those of us who had discerned a vocation to marry clergy. And he said, I lived in a family, I know what it's like. I know what it's like to be in a family, so I have those same insights. And then I kind of recounted some of the aspects of, have you ever had to sit up with a child sick at night? Well, my brother got sick. Finally, I said, well, just because you are a passenger in an airplane doesn't mean that you know how to fly the airplane. So I think that finally that began to let him understand that married life is different than family life. So married priesthood provides a great blessing to the church in terms of spiritual sustenance for parishioners who themselves are married, or in terms of unmarried parishioners that are discerning the call to marriage or discerning the call to the priesthood. So being armed with this experience and this reality is a great blessing, and it has been a great blessing for me. There are some issues as well that need to be addressed by the Eastern Catholic churches in the Western Hemisphere, because we now have a restoration of married clergy. We now have to address the issue of what does it mean to have a wife that is also in training. We just began to address this in the late 2000s in my seminary in Ottawa, Canada, when the wives of seminarians were brought in for certain sessions over a period of time to talk about what does it mean to be a matushka, or a pani de brodica, or a korilla. What does it mean to be a priest's wife? That's something unknown in the Eastern Catholic churches in terms of training the spouses of priests. So that's in the process of being reestablished, and we look to the Orthodox seminaries in terms of their experience and their expertise in this issue. And there is also still sometimes an issue of acceptance of Eastern Catholic priests by Western Catholic priests. So that's something that I still experience now and then, though not too often, but that's part of the education that needs to go along with the reason, or when I encounter Western priests or Western clerics, to educate them about the honor that is due to the whole idea of a married clergy. And finally, the last point I want to bring up is the importance of married clergy in the ecumenical dialogue. The Orthodox churches have looked at the treatment of the Eastern Catholic priests over the years with great disdain and great fear, or misgiving, I should say, because they see in the dialogue that we are participating in, which is ultimately, hopefully, going to result in the reunion of East and West. They see and they look at how have the Eastern churches been treated, the Eastern Catholic Church has been treated by the larger Roman Catholic Church. And they look specifically at married clergy. And I remember in 2001, I was recently ordained a deacon a couple weeks before the Orientale Lumen Conference in Washington, D.C. And the first thing I did after my ordination was to take a road trip. And we went to Washington, D.C. for the Orientale Lumen Conference. And during that conference, Bishop Vsevolod of Skopelos, of blessed memory, he's was the Ukrainian Orthodox bishop in Chicago. And he was there, and was very active in the ecumenical dialogue. And he was there giving a talk about ecumenical issues. And Cardinal McCarrick, who was the Cardinal of Washington, D.C., was sitting in the front row. And I remember Bishop Sevalod kind of stopping his talk after mentioning married clergy and looking Cardinal McCarrick straight in the eye and saying something to the effect, "We are watching you. We are watching how the Roman Catholic Church treats our Eastern Catholic brethren, especially concerning married clergy." So the Orthodox see the reality of a married clergy as an essential aspect of a ecumenical reality that we need to work towards understanding. Now, of course, like I said, in 2014, that is no longer an issue, but we know that it has been foremost in the minds of the Orthodox hierarchy as to how their Eastern Catholic brethren have been treated. So with that, that's a basic overview of the reality of Eastern Catholic married clergy and the common life that we as Eastern Catholics now share with the Orthodox. There is one final thing I forgot to mention. Mostly what I'm talking about is in the Byzantine tradition. I'm not too clear about the reality that exists in the other Eastern Catholic parishes. I know there are very few married clergy in the Chaldean diocese here. I know of one. I don't think there are more than one or two or three Eastern Catholic Chaldean priests in the United States. They are addressing that internally to themselves, whether or not they as a church will re-establish a married clergy. The Maronites, I think, are married clergy is unknown in the Maronite church. The Melkites, more and more, they have more and more married clergy. The Ruthenians, they're growing in number, but I think the greatest number of married clergy in the Eastern churches, Eastern Catholic churches, is in the Ukrainian Catholic Church. So, with that, I open it up to Father George.
Let me
Thank you, Father.
Let me add a code. Just a little tail end for celibacy as well as married priests. You have no idea how much I admire those of you who are married. And I tell this to my parishioners on a regular basis. People say, "Oh, Father, what a tough life you have." But I say, "You've got to be joking. I don't have to worry about a mortgage. I don't have to worry about insurance. I don't have to worry about, are the kids going to get on drugs? I don't have to worry about the braces. I don't have to worry about education. I don't have to worry about a spousal relationship. The most difficult vocation in the church is the married life. And compared to those who are married, and especially you who are married, I'm on easy street, and I know that, and I think most priests do. Maybe they don't. I mean, they think, oh, we suffer so much. From what? And you mentioned, you come home at the end of the day and you got a support system. My mother died in 2003. My father died in 2006. And one of my sisters-in-law said to me, she pulled me aside one afternoon, she said, "Dennis, I'm worried about you." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, when Vince, my brothers, I have two brothers. She says, when Vince comes home, he has me. When Larry goes home, he has Edna. Who do you have?" I said, "The cat and Jesus. And sometimes neither are very comforting."
I also want to give just a little follow-up and say that the comments on the psychosocial aspects of the married life and the priesthood are right on. I think it is for the Orthodox as well as the Eastern Catholic, and both in the pros and the cons, so that's right on target. The economic situation is a little different, I think, among the Orthodox churches, because we have some very, very, I think many of the Eastern Catholic parishes are somewhat smaller, so they're under great economic stress, while among the Orthodox, there are a good number of parishes that are relatively large, and they can support, at least financially, the priest and his family. And the Greek Archdiocese would be an example. Among the Antiochians, somewhat it would be some of the smaller dioceses, like the OCA or the Carpatho Russians, you mentioned, Alexis Toth and things like that. They would have more of a problem, like yours.
And there's
So-
the added aspect of a married clergy in the Eastern Catholic Churches is so new in the Western Hemisphere that there are parishes that are not used to that whole concept. And so they've been living under a reality where the priest is celibate, he doesn't need a lot, and suddenly they have a family with 3 kids or 5 kids or 2 kids. They're not used to then upping their pledges in order to make do for the reality of a married clergy. Though they want to marry clergy, they sometimes they don't understand what that really means.
Why don't we take a little break now, about a 5-minute break, and you can write out any questions. I'll say 5 minutes because Monsignor Dennis has to leave, my lord, has to leave at 12 o'clock. And so that'll give us a chance to answer,
Yeah.
he'll answer any questions first, and then we'll have a very short meeting. Yes.
Can I say a word?
Well, why don't we start the break and then,
Before the break.
well, Monsignor Dennis has to leave at 12.
Give me 5 minutes, please.
Monsignor,
Just give him 5 minutes.
go ahead.
You're not gonna win, Father George.
Dear brothers in Christ, I have a message for you, and this is not related to the subject that you have heard. Believe me, this is my 64th year in marriage. A married priest has difficulties, but has more grace from God. Whenever he puts his difficulties before God, God shows him how to deal with his difficulties. My message to you is something else, different from this subject. So that I may not be too long with you, I want to call your attention to a very, very important message from God, from our Lord Jesus Christ, that is in Matthew chapter 8, verses. The story begins from 5 to 13, about the centurion who came to Jesus to heal his servant who was at home dying. And just to remind you of that story, Jesus told him, I will come to heal him. He said, no, I don't deserve that you come in under the roof of my house. Just say a word, he will be healed. Our Lord Jesus magnified this faith of a pagan and said in verse 10, verily I say unto you, I haven't found such a great faith even in Israel, which is supposed to believe in me. For all their prophets prophesied about me, and here I am among them, and they don't believe in me. Many will come from the east and the west, and will lie down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of God. And the most dangerous words were, and the children of the kingdom shall be thrown out into the outer darkness, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. Nowadays we see hundreds, thousands, millions of Muslims converting to Christianity. I know so much about this subject. Many Jews are converting to Christianity, not as Christians. They have synagogues for Christ, not churches. This is what they call it in Israel. And our children, our people in our parishes live their Christianity on the margin routinely. I came to ask many communities, are you members in the kingdom of God? Believe me, they were hesitant to answer me. They did not know that they became members in the kingdom of God through baptism and faith. One of the things that I criticize in my Orthodox Church is that though I believe children should be baptized as infants, but the godparents are not doing their jobs with the children that they baptize. That's why our youth, our children, grow up careless about Christianity, know nothing about Christianity. Whereas the Arabic words shbin or arab for a godfather in English are not the proper words. The proper word is sponsor of the faith. Would you accept to sponsor the faith of this child? This means you are responsible before God if he grows up not faithful, because every person who is to be baptized must confess Jesus as Lord and Savior. A child cannot do it. We have a sponsor to his faith. When the sponsor fails to do his job, our children grow up knowing nothing about Christianity. If I tell you, I like some children in the Protestant churches, not the Protestant, but whom they call themselves believers. They are totally different from our children. I thought I was not the proper priest during all these years. This is my 62nd year in the priesthood, by the grace of God. When I read Matthew 8:10 to 12, I realized, I read it so many times, how is it that I did not pay attention to it? What is it? I'm asking you. I said the verses. Which verse that I said just now is the most dangerous one?
Children of Israel will be thrown out.
And the children of the kingdom shall be thrown out. That is to say, when God created Adam and Eve, a question to those who did not hear me before saying this, please, those who heard me, don't answer. Did God create Adam outside paradise or inside paradise? A question for you, priests.
Inside. Inside.
Who says inside? Who says outside? No one? All of you are wrong. One? Yeah. You heard me before. And before you heard me, you were one of them. God created Adam outside paradise. How did he create him? After his own image and likeness. God is righteous, Adam was righteous. God is holy, Adam was holy. So he put him in paradise. When we are, before baptism, we are outside the kingdom. Through baptism, we bury the sin that we inherited from Adam and Eve, bury it, and we are born again. Orthodox people do not talk much about born again. We are afraid of mentioning this to our people. We are born again. We have been clothed with what? As many as have been baptized have put on Christ. البسنا المسيح. We put on Christ. What does that mean? Accepted his teaching in the gospel. What do we say? What is the first thing in the Lord's Prayer that we ask for ourselves? Give us this day our daily bread. In the Orthodox Greek and Arabic, we add one word, which is homoousion. Homoousion means essential bread. What is the essential bread? It's not by bread alone that man lives. Abuna, sit down, please. Please.
Adios.
Okay.
Does anyone have any questions for Monsignor Dennis?
Abuna, don't leave.
I have to, Father, I've got
Yes,
appointments
yes,
all
please.
afternoon, starting at 12:30.
Just
Sorry.
2 words I want
Does
to
he
say.
have-
2 words will be 50. No, I can't.
Father, he has other
They
appointments.
don't like to, okay. Anyhow, it's up to you. I just bring it to you because I feel, it's where I failed with my parish. I want to call the attention of my brother priests to preach on this subject in their parishes. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll take that little short break now. I think there's a restroom here.
Yeah, yep,
And
men and women.
and women over there, okay? Take about, well, Monsignor Dennis left, so, Father James can answer any questions, I'll try to answer any questions.
We
At
can
the
eat.
same time, Father, do you want to eat now?
Yeah.
While,
We eat and then we can
Right.
ask.
take a break, take something to eat, you can ask Father Hannah any questions individually if you want, and, then we'll have our meeting as we sit down again, okay?